It's not in the face! Thank you.
Hello and welcome to Hey, Not the Face with your host, John Nash, and your producer, me, Steffi Haynes. And today we are going to talk about UFC settlement stuff. And we're going to talk about some finances because we've got some very interesting documents from both. But first, let's check in with our fearless leader and find out how he's been doing since we last talked day before yesterday.
Yeah, the same as the day before yesterday. I want to apologize in advance because Miss Isla has jumped on the desk and she is threatening to interfere with the show at any second. She is. So it's I know it's your spot. I know. Okay.
Just put the mic in front of her.
She is right. She loves crawling up and rubbing against it. So we might hear her during the show. So.
All right. So, John, let's talk about the new settlement proposal for the UFC because holy crap, what is going on? Why do we even have a new settlement proposal?
Well, I'm sure all listeners know because you people are not morons. You're the most intelligent fans of combat sports. That's why also the more intelligent you are, the more likely you are to subscribe.
That's right.
So pay subscribers. So anyways, after I got that pitch out of the way, see how that excellent pitch. The reason they had to submit it is the judge just 2 weeks ago, they had a hearing where we thought they would rubber stamp the settlement. Most people assume that because both sides agree to this. The judge says he has concerns about this settlement. And during his concerns, and again, I got to thank Paul Giff for being there because if he wasn't there, we wouldn't know any of this stuff, basically. He was there, reported. His concerns seem to lie in a couple things. One is that the Lee class, now that's the December 16, 2010 to June 30th, 2017 class of UFC fighters, people that fought in the UFC during that time. He was concerned that the settlement wasn't a high enough amount of money considering how much what they were asking for when he certified the class. They said damages were from $811 million to $1.6 billion. So he's like, why are we settling for anywhere from 10 to 20% that amount? The other concern, it seems to be, you have to kind of read between the lines, is that the Johnson class's concerns, they have separate concerns from the Lee class. Their concerns is about injunctive relief because their case hasn't moved that farther along. That seems to be what is being laid on Johnson, and less financial because they haven't cleared the hurdle of discovery, expert reports, and class cert, or even got towards trial. So that seems to be his concerns. And so the plaintiffs and the defendants want to convince him. So the plaintiffs submitted the new settlement proposal that they hope the judge will sign off on.
Do we know anything about the new proposal?
Yes, because yesterday or Monday or whatever day, I can't remember though, every day bleeds together. They filed with the court the new proposal, and we could see it. I downloaded it, looked it over. So we do know what the new proposal is, and we do know the changes they made. We have all that stuff. So
what are the changes that they made to the plan?
Well, it's interesting. Really, what they seem to have done is just shuffle money around. And by shuffling, I mean they've shuffled more money from Johnson to Lee because Lee has the problem with the judge has a problem with the Lee amount. So before, originally the plan was we have a settlement for $335 million. The lawyers are asking for a third of it plus some other expenses. So that would leave $215 million. Now the judge has to prove that. And so it does seem very plausible if the judge is not happy with the settlement, he might not approve that full payment for the attorneys. So the fighter share might actually go up. But right now it's estimated at $215 million. The original plan was Lee would get 75% of that and Johnson would get 25%. The current plan is Lee gets 90% of that money and Johnson gets 10%. And now there's also another change is originally for each of the class Lee and Johnsons, the money they get would be divided in two parts. One tranche would be 80% was going to be set aside for what's called event compensation. In other words, how much you made during your time at that period in the UFC, that's the percentage you'd get of that. And the other tranche was called the bout, basically would be split by the number of fights you had during that period. Now it's no longer going to be 80-20. It's going to be made 70-30. So 70% for the event compensation, where you take your total what you earned and get a percentage based on that. And then 30% for the bouts, where you get a set amount. Everybody splits evenly based on how many fights they had in the UFC during that period.
Who's going to get the lion's share of this again?
Well, the lion's share, probably, I guess you'd argue the attorneys get a third. But the biggest share of the fighter share is going to go to the league class, and then the biggest share that should go to the highest paid fighters. Although the new formula the new calculations would mean that lower paid fighters actually will get will make more in this version than they did the previous for the league class.
But Conor McGregor will walk away with the biggest chunk, correct?
Well, he made the most money. He will walk away with the biggest chunk. For the league class, he should get about $7 million. That's the estimate we come up with.
Okay. All right. Will he still have access to the Johnson class?
If you're in the league class, you can also be in the Johnson class. So if you fought during the league period, you're also in the Johnson period. This is one of the interesting things, though. And this is something I'll bring up really quick. Is the number of fighters in Johnson, as we know, as we talked about, a large percent of them signed waivers, right? Mm-hmm. And that means, and in this filing, we actually have clues of how many fighters signed waivers. I shouldn't say we know how many fighters signed waivers. About 55% of the fighters supposedly signed waivers. But we now know how much of compensation the fighters that didn't sign waivers are made during that period. During the Johnson period, we know over $1 billion was paid to the fighters. Apparently, if you do the math, reverse engineer what the numbers they have in there, only $143 million is available to fighters that did not sign waivers. And so, in other words, over 85, maybe close to 90% of all the money earned during the Johnson period is covered by these waivers. And the reason I bring that up is the only way I can calculate that the amount got that low is fighters like Conor McGregor had to have signed the waiver or fall under the waiver at least. Because there's no way you get an amount that small with as many fighters that didn't sign waivers unless the very top guys. So you're asking, does Conor McGregor get the money? He technically should. He should get about 10% of whatever he earned in the Johnson period. But it seems very likely that he might get the amount that all the people that signed the waiver gets, which is $3,000 for his membership in Johnson.
That's what I was going for, because you know what? The last time we had this conversation, I was so flabbergasted by how much money Conor was going to get from both the classes that it almost seemed unfair. Now, I know that it's not unfair because Conor's probably the most underpaid of them all. However, it just seemed so unfair that the Johnson class was going to have to give up so much of it to Conor. And now I have a little levity in my voice because now that may not happen, and those guys may be able to get their fair share, so to speak. I kind of like the idea that Conor's getting equal to everybody else in that smaller class.
It is amusing that the highest paid guy is potentially going to get $3,000, which is insane. So I'm going to go over really quick because there's probably hopefully there's a lot of fighters listening. We're doing this. This is 4 fighters. So
yes.
we really, and I'm going to stress too, and we talked about this before. If you're a fighter, I would highly recommend you go to the UFC FightersClassAction.com website. So that website has the second tab over is the Stay Informed button. You hit that, and then you fill out the details, and that way they have all your information. They can contact you. The reason I wanted them to stay in touch with you is because eventually, if this gets settled or whatever, you should stay informed of the details. But if it gets settled, they are going to send a contact information to you with how much you earned during the period that you're a class member. and you have to approve that. And if you approve it and say that's right, or you can test some of it, then after that, they'll send you your check. So I want to make sure fighters, I really want to make sure you guys get your money. All of you guys get your money. So I would recommend that. Now, if you are a fighter in the league class, we can tell pretty good how much based on this settlement you will make. And the simple way to figure it out is take all the money you made from your show, from your win, from any side letters you might have had, if you had those, from all your bonuses, discretionary bonuses, locker room bonuses, you want to call them that, fight of the night bonuses, pay-per-view bonuses, all the money you made for the bout, right? Put that together for the period that you fought from December 16, 2010 through June 30th, 2017. Put that together and then take 24% of that. That is your event compensation. Then for every fight you had in the UFC during that period, you will get an additional approximately $10,800. So if you fought 10 times the UFC and made $500,000 in the lead period, you would make $120,000 on the bout compensation and about $18,000 on your 10 fights for your bout compensation. Together, you put that together and you'd get $228,000 total.
So fighters like Donald Cerrone and Jim Miller will probably be able to clean up a bit.
Yes, exactly. And some guys that fought just a few fights in the UFC and maybe didn't win. I know some fighters that fought, let's say, 5 times and made $40,000, right? Mm-hmm. Well, they would get $9,600 on their event compensation, but the 5 fights would be another $54,000, so $63,800. They'd make basically 50% more than what they earned during the UFC, their UFC run during that span. So in some ways, if you're like many of the people that are more concerned about the bottom guys, I mean, technically, I think the top guys were the most ripped off.
Yes.
But a lot of people are like, I'm more concerned about the bottom guys because they have more troubles. They didn't make as much money. They might have health problems that they have to deal with, financial issues. They are going to make more money under this settlement plan than they would have under the other settlement plan. And it's not the massive winning some people are hoping for, but it could be a sizable amount for a lot of fighters.
It could be life-changing for a lot of the fighters, too.
There is a lot of them that it truthfully would be life-changing. Mm-hmm. And they do list, I think this was done intentionally to try to convince the judge, they list the number of how many fighters, like a third of the fighters are going to make at least $100,000 or more. Then it goes down the line of how many will make $200,000, whatever. At the last column was how many will get at least $1 million is 36. So a sizable number of the fighters in the league class will get a large chunk of money. Now, the Johnson class will be much smaller, but for the Johnson class, there also is a much smaller pool of fighters. So they will not, it won't be they won't get nothing. They'll get something if you're a Johnson fighter that doesn't have the arbitration agreement or the class action waiver. So, but it's going to be that they don't have, it's impossible because we don't know the number of fighters, the number of fights, right? Because there's so many have signed waivers. So it's impossible to calculate exactly how they're going to figure it out. But roughly you should, if you're in the Johnson class and you didn't sign a waiver, you should probably get about 10% of what you earned during your Johnson period. So it's, it's not massive money, but if you made money on Lee, it's some extra. I do have questions though about this waiver because it's shocking how much of the fight payouts are covered by the waiver, right? 85 to 90%. And so I have a hard time believing, I'm shocked that so many stars apparently signed the waiver and agreement.
If you wouldn't mind backing up for a moment, what was the percentage you estimated for the fighters that actually signed the waiver?
Well, I didn't have to estimate this. They said about 55% signed the waiver. Right?
So only 55% right now have signed the waiver.
Only 55%. It might be a little higher, but around 55%. But the purses cover 85% of the earnings. So that suggests those that fought the most in the UFC and those that made the most are under the arbitration agreement and the waiver, right? The class action waiver. Now, this is where, I have a question because did they all sign this agreement? because I've been now asking around, and some fighters don't remember ever seeing an agreement, and they looked in their contracts. They don't remember seeing this in their contracts that they signed. But so I started thinking possibly it was inserted into bout agreements instead. We know during the COVID period that there's all these changes were inserted into bout agreements, and a lot of fighters signed them without even reading them. It's also possible it was also put into everything else. Maybe you had a sponsorship deal between you and someone in the UFC, you had to sign it. Maybe if you did a broadcast deal when you're on the desk, or you had to sign this.
That's right. You were saying that in our last show that broadcast agreements might have that in there.
But this is another thing that it might be, and this is one I would really stress fighters to contest, because in the contract that had this agreement, at least the ones I saw, almost all the ones I looked through, it does have this paragraph, 2 paragraphs at the very end of the section about the arbitration agreement and the class action waiver. And it reads, I'm going to read it. By signing below, the parties affirm that they knowingly and freely entered in this agreement to arbitrate, right? So that's the section saying that. But the next paragraph is the one I'm going to stress. Fighters understand that fighters signing of this agreement to arbitrate is not required for the agreement to arbitrate to be enforced. If fighter begins or continues working for Zuffa after receiving this agreement to arbitrate, the agreement to arbitrate will be effective, and fighter will be deemed to have consented to, ratified, and accepted this agreement to arbitrate through fighter's knowledge of it and commencement of or continued performance of activities or provisions of service under this agreement with Zuffa. So what that says is if they sent you this contract and you didn't even sign it, or you asked to have it excluded or whatever, but you didn't sign it, they're going to take the fact that you got the agreement and continued to work with UFC. So if you had another contract and you didn't sign this one, but you fought under the other contract, they're going to say they're claiming in this wording that this means you consented to this arbitration agreement.
That doesn't sound legal. I'm sorry.
It really doesn't sound legal to me. I'm not a legal expert. I originally didn't think the class action waivers were legal, but now we have a Supreme Court that's ruled, 10 times that those things and arbitration agreements are illegal. So, but this one sounds really illegal. So, and I bring it up because it would kind of explain why so many people seem to fall under the arbitration agreement. Now, I have no evidence that this is I don't know for a fact that the UFC's, putting these people that got a contract but didn't sign it, considering that they signed the arbitration agreement, but it's possible. So only reason I bring it up, if you're a fighter and you find out that you're on the waiver and you don't remember ever signing an agreement, I would look in, and when the judge, if they're going to have the settlement, eventually, even if the judge approves the settlement, he'll have a hearing. I would show up, and I would either show up or write a letter to the judge and protest and say, listen, I think this is unfair that I have to get $3,000 instead of a larger amount. I'd also contest that the settlement plan is unfair because they had to negotiate on the fact that everybody signed a waiver and took all the money away. But I would contest this because this is what's in the contracts. We know they have them in the contracts. I just don't know for a fact that these are the fighters that are being considered to have signed arbitration agreements. But I would seriously contest this, and I would look into it if you're a fighter and you find out you have you fall under the arbitration agreement class action waiver group and you don't remember ever signing it.
Now, you polled a bunch of fighters. What do they want to see happen? Well,
I polled a ton, and I want to thank the ones that got back to me. The majority did, so I appreciate that. For the most of the fighters, I would say over half, they think, and I should stress or explain that when I did the poll, I kind of explained that the chances of winning might be slight on the go to trial, because that seems to be the position the plaintiffs are holding, that winning in trial might be very difficult, right? So you're going into trial, and if you don't win, then you lose out the money completely. The other option I gave him is if we could contest this and possibly win multiples more. And then I even gave someone an option. Would you like to see him hold out for injunctive relief? But which is not really on the table right now. But the majority of the fighters weighed it, and they said they should settle. It's too big a risk. And also because a lot of the fighters need the money right now. The idea that it might take a year for the trial to clear out before they get paid, additional year, and then go through an appeal process potentially that didn't sit well with them. So the majority of the fighters thought they should take the settlement, hope that they shouldn't, but they hope the judge accepts the settlement. I would say about 60%. I'd have to tally it up, but I know it's over half. And then for the remainder, about it's split 50-50. 20% said it should go to trial, and then the other 20% wanted a trial to go to trial if they could get injunctive relief back on the table. Otherwise, they couldn't get injunctive relief. They were kind of leaning towards settlement. So it seems like the majority of fighters would think that the judge should accept the settlement, probably because they view it risky. And you got to remember, a lot of these guys could probably use the money, and the amount of money, even though it's not as we stress again, it's not the earth-shattering money people were hoping for. It is a lot of money for guys that might be on financial hard times right now, could use it right now.
Okay, I've got a side question here, a little bit of a curveball.
Fire
what
away.
About, and I'm only asking this in case fighters are thinking this as well. What about if you were cut from the UFC? Those fighters are still in this, correct?
Yes. Okay. If you were in the UFC and participated in a fight, no matter what happened afterwards, you are fall in the class. As long as you fought in the class periods that are covered. Okay. If you fought before December 16, 2010, it doesn't count. If you fought in Strike Force, even under Zuffa or WC, it doesn't count, unfortunately. But if you fought in a UFC bout between those periods, the class periods, basically from 2011, because I don't think there was any UFC event before that from December 16 to the end of the year. But from the beginning of 2011 until now, you would fall in the as a member of the class.
Is there anything that would preclude a fighter? For instance, and the reason I'm saying this is there was a fighter that fought during the Lee class that is currently sitting in a prison for murder.
Well, he might not be able to get his. That wouldn't exclude him. We know who you're talking about. That wouldn't. That wouldn't exclude him. But there's a strong possibility. I don't know how Mexican law works, that his income, any financial reward, might be. He might have to surrender it to his victim. I don't know. Some states have laws like that. I don't know what Mexican law is on that, but. Or it might go to his next of kin, or someone. So that's a possibility. I know several, deceased fighters. If they haven't set it up, it'll go to your next of kin. Okay. If you don't collect the money because you just forget to collect it when it's your turn, or you're not, you're passed away and you have no next of kin, the money will be split up amongst the remaining fighters.
Okay.
Now I should be careful saying that, because some fighter might get in his head to go kill all the other fighters. That's not a good idea. But it'd be split up amongst all the other fighters, unless it's too small amount to make financial sense to split up, and then it'll go to charity. So it'd have to be a very small amount to do that. But fighters will get the entire amount that's put in the pool for fighters. They get all that.
I asked that because not necessarily because of that specific fighter, but I'm sure there are other fighters out there that may have been in the UFC that might be sitting in a U.S. jail for who knows what, traffic tickets, whatever. I'm just wondering if, having being in jail or having felonies or any kind of criminal charges on you precludes you from your portion of the settlement, but it does not. Correct? No, it does. The one thing we could possibly is if you don't have a means to get the money, if you have no means to contact them to confirm your, address or your bank account, or to confirm that this is you. That's owed the money, then then your share might not be sent to you because you never affirmed that you were a member and were owed money. Okay. All right. One last question before we wrap up this particular section that we're talking about today. And that is, one more time, just reiterate, what do you think the judge is going to do here?
Well, I'm not sure what the judge is going to do. It's first of all, the hearing was supposed to take place this Friday, to kind of where the judge would look over the evidence, and it's been postponed till July 12th. I don't know if that's because he just doesn't have the time, or if he really needs. They did send him a ton of material to go through, so he probably needs the time to go over that material. I'm going to guess that he will approve the settlement. They're laying it on thick. It's odds are they approve the settlement. But I don't think it's 100%. I think there's a sizable chance, not definitely the greater chances. I think he approves it, but I think there is a chance that he says, I cannot approve this because this is not nearly the type of damages. Not just that, it does nothing really to hurt the UFC. Maybe it probably was not smart of the UFC to kind of celebrate the settlement so much. It just stressed investors that was a big win for them. So you might look at it that way, in which case the plaintiffs and the defendants would have to get together and submit a new settlement plan. And it's not guaranteed that the UFC would go along with that. They might say, we don't want to, do any changes. We don't want to add anything additional. And if the judge just not approve the settlement, then we go to trial. If it is approved, though, there will be a hearing. The fighters will have a chance to, if they don't think this should be settled, they don't like this settlement plan, they'll have a chance to contest it. And if you don't like it, I would suggest you contest it. I would also, and this is just a suggestion I'd make too, partly is if you're in the Johnson class, because you're getting so little and you're kind of the injunctive relief class, there's really no major injunctive relief. I don't know why some Johnson fighters don't show up to the hearing or write a letter to the judge and ask, why, as part of the settlement, isn't the UFC not keeping the contractual provisions they had from 2017 to 20 during the Nagano period, right?
That's a good idea there.
Why are they not including in the settlement a sunset clause, a hard 5-year sunset clause like we had before, and a maximum of 3 declinations that can be extended? Those were 2 major changes to the contracts that were very positive for the fighters. I would bring that up. There is a chance that maybe the judge goes, you're right. That is something that should be as part of any settlement. Why, if the UFC did not abuse monopoly power and doesn't have a monopoly, why would that impact their business? They seem to do just fine with those terms in the contract, right? That's one thing. 2 is if I'm a fighter and I have signed a waiver, again, I would double check to make sure I really signed that waiver. I have some questions based on the contract language. I would also, if I'm Conor McGregor, let's say, and I'm sure he's not listening. He's out partying probably to get ready for his fight. But if you really if you under a waiver, Conor McGregor, fighters like him, the very top guys, it's not financially possible for most fighters to do this. But for the very top guys, I would think about opting out of the Johnson class and then going into arbitration. It's going to cost you a lot of money, perhaps hundreds of thousands of dollars, perhaps even $1 million, because you have to hire your own experts and do all the analysis and all the stuff for the antitrust trial. But go into arbitration, because truthfully, someone like McGregor, I think you could realistically make an argument that he's owed $100 million by the UFC.
Yep.
For the Johnson, just for his last 4 fights for the Johnson period. So I would think I would leave that open for a select few fighters that have the financial means and would probably be owed, tens of millions of dollars by the UFC. That might be a gamble they want to take. But for other fighters, unfortunately, opting out and going to arbitration in the Johnson class, at least in the Lee class, you'll get some money. Does not seem like a realistic solution. But I would maybe go to the judge and complain about the class action waivers, that perhaps they were not submitted properly, and and ask maybe about the contract changes.
All right.
Or protest that it's even being settled if you don't like the idea that it's being settled.
And one more time, where should they go to find information about this settlement? Well,
besides us, thank you, but besides us, I stress that you sign up and put your name in the UFC Fighters Class Action, UFCFightersClassAction.com, that website. So that way they will keep you informed. It has documents on it, information. But if your name's in there, that way they have your name on record and file, and they know how to get it hold of you. And that way you know for sure that when the time comes for the money to be sent out, when the first contact information to get you on the list and approved, they will have your name and they can send you the information, and you can double check it and then get your money.
And for those of you fighters that are listening, that means you're here on our Substack. So if you actually look at the post that this audio is attached to, all of that information is listed for you right here. Now, we promised you guys some one content, and boy, John's got some good stuff. So right off the bat, I'm going to ask you, they filed recently their 2022 finances with ACRA. So first and foremost, for those that didn't listen to our one episode a year or so ago, tell everybody what ACRA is and why they are filing with them after so long a break.
Well, ACRA is the Accounting and Corporate Regulatory Authority, ACRA. It's under the Ministry of Finance of the government of Singapore. It's basically the Singapore version of the SEC. So companies, when you do business there, you're supposed to file with them, and they're much more public about company information. And public companies in the U.S., like you see with the UFC now, you get a lot of information. Less so with private companies, but in Singapore, kind of like the UK, private companies do have to post stuff that's publicly available. Now, the reason we haven't seen this lately, why it's been 2 years or more, maybe 3 years now, I think, that we've seen an ACRA filing from them, is because for a while they domiciled from Singapore to the Cayman Islands. And the Cayman is very secretive about their finances. And so when it was there, they didn't have to file anything. And so it was like a black hole. We didn't know much. But my theory is they are trying to get some new financing. That's my theory, because there's some rumors that they're trying to do that as well. And that's why they went back to Singapore, because it does not look good to try to raise money when you're trying to keep all your finances secret. So they're posting it, trying to show, hey, look how good we're doing. We're making it public, and the company's doing fine. Please invest money in us.
John, historically, tell everyone why I laughed at Cayman Islands.
Well, because Cayman Islands is famous historically for that's where you go to hide your money. And because over the years, we've reported on One Championship's finances, which not to exaggerate, generally look awful to the common person, because it's just huge amounts of losses every year. And after our last one, it seemed like they decided to let's move to the Cayman so we don't have to constantly have our finances picked apart about how bad they're doing. So, I can hear you laughing still about it.
I love it. I can't help myself. I think it's marvelous. So. All right.
Anton's doing high fives over that right now.
What are the headline results, though? How much are they making? How close are they to profitability? Because, John, for 12 years now, Kshatriya has been telling us, this year, we're going to make profit. This year, we're going to show a profit. This year, you're going to see it. It's going to be, the proof is in the pudding.
Well, I guess you will not be shocked to learn they're not profitable. This year, the top, I guess, the item most people pay attention is the revenue. This year, they report for 2022, the full 12 months. They report in U.S. dollars, $84.5 million in revenue, total revenue. And then their losses, though, after expenses, they report about $62 million in losses. So that's a negative 62. In other words, they spent about $150 million on that 84. And so there's $62 million in the hole. So that's, again, now historically, what does that mean? How have they done before? Well, this is where you can kind of tell where their money's been going. So they've raised, as of the end of 2022, they have raised a total of $536 million. And they had left $106 million US. That's all they had left. So at that burn rate, about $60 million a year, that means sometime, if they kept doing it, that means sometime about right now, they should have been running out of money. I don't think, though, they're running out, because I think part of it is, if you look where they're holding events now, and look the type of events they're holding. My guess is their burn rate has gotten a lot slower. So
because they're holding everything in Singapore, pretty much.
No, well, not even Singapore. They're holding it in Thailand.
Oh,
they stopped holding in Singapore. They only hold like one event a year in Singapore now. So everything's in Thailand. And also they only hold like 2 MMA bouts per event on average.
Mm-hmm.
So it's very few. So anyways, that's the top line, I guess, is 84 million in revenue. They lost another $62 million, and they've burned through 80% of the capital they've raised.
All right. So where are they making their money? What are their various revenue sources, and how much is each category bringing in?
Well, this is where it starts getting interesting. This is where we see some interesting accounting on some of these items. So,
to access the bonus content of this episode, you must be a paid subscriber. To do that, go to heynottheface.substack.com and subscribe today.
Ow! Ow! Not the face! Ooh! Ooh! Okay, the face!